Before you step into my story, I need you to feel the weight of a single moment. The day a celebration turned into a wound. Imagine discovering on your wedding anniversary a note hidden in your husband's drawer. Not from you, but from her. A stranger who claimed not only his love but his loyalty, his body, his future. This is not just a story about betrayal. It is a story about silence, about survival, and about the strength to face the truth when it burns the deepest. Stay with me. Because once the lies are revealed, nothing is ever the same again. It was the morning of our wedding anniversary, a date that for years I had circled on calendars, planned dinners around, saved dresses for. A date that once pulsed with joy and anticipation. The kind of day when you pause, no matter how busy life has been, and remember why you said yes in the first place. I woke early, long before him, and padded barefoot through the house. The floor was cool against my skin, the air heavy with the faint perfume of the lilies he had brought home the night before, arranged sloppily in a vase on the dining table. He never remembered details like types of flowers or colors, but it hadn't mattered to me. The gesture had been enough. At least I thought it was. I brewed coffee, listening to the familiar hiss and drip of the machine, the quiet hum of a home that had carried us through years of arguments and reconciliations, dinners and silences, laughter and grief. I slipped into the dress I knew he liked, navy blue with a subtle sheen, the one he once told me made me look like the woman he first fell in love with. My reflection in the mirror looked tired, the years weighing heavy beneath my eyes, but I smiled at myself anyway. Today, I told myself, was about love enduring. When he finally stirred, the water in the shower running through the pipes above me, I decided to lay out a tie for him. Something small, a gesture I had done countless times in our marriage. I opened the dresser drawer expecting the familiar clutter, receipts he never threw away, cufflinks from his father, a watch strap with a broken clasp. But instead, my fingers brushed against the corner of folded paper. It wasn't hidden deep. It was there, waiting, as though carelessly tossed or perhaps deliberately left. My heart stuttered in my chest. For reasons I couldn't explain, I knew before I even opened it that it wasn't mine. The handwriting hit me first. Not the blocky, practical script of his co-workers. Not the messy scrawl of my own hand. No, this was elegant, flowing, undeniably feminine. My eyes scanned the words once, twice, before the meaning sank in like a blade. Last night was unforgettable. I can still feel you on my skin, counting the days until I see you again. Happy anniversary to her, but remember, you belong to me. I froze, the words burning into me. My breath caught in my throat, the paper trembling in my hands. The air in the room thinned, as though I had stepped under water. My vision blurred. I read the note again, desperate for some other explanation, some way to twist the meaning into something less devastating. But there it was, undeniable, unflinching in its cruelty. I sank onto the bed, the mattress dipping beneath my weight. The paper clutched like evidence in a crime I hadn't yet understood. The shower ran in the distance, the sound of him humming through the water, casual, ordinary, as though my life hadn't just shattered. Memories erupted, rushing at me like waves I couldn't stop. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips that had never quite added up, the distracted look in his eyes when I asked about his day, the way he sometimes pulled away from me in bed, muttering about exhaustion. I had buried my suspicions under loyalty, under hope, under the stubborn belief that marriage was endurance. And now, in my hands, I held proof that I had been enduring a lie. The flowers on the table mocked me. Their petals, too bright, too fresh, seemed staged. An apology without words, a cover for the secret he carried. How many anniversaries had I spent smiling at gestures like these while he whispered words of intimacy to another woman? How many of our shared moments had been split between two lives I hadn't known existed? The paper was not just ink and letters. It was a confession, written not by him but by someone who claimed ownership of him. You belong to me. The words crawled beneath my skin, burned into my chest. He belonged to me. He had stood at an altar, held my hands in his, sworn to honor and cherish. And yet here I was, holding proof that those vows had been hollowed out, replaced by promises whispered into another woman's ear. I pressed the note to my chest, rocking slightly as if movement could dull the sting. My tears blurred the ink, smearing the sharp lines, but the words remained seared in my memory. Around me, the house felt different. The walls seemed thinner, the rooms smaller, the air heavier. The home we had built together suddenly felt like a stranger's, a stage where I had been the only one performing. He emerged from the bathroom minutes later, his hair damp, his face glowing with the freshness of a man who still believed he controlled the narrative. He smiled at me, kissed my cheek as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I slipped the note into the drawer before he could see it in my hands, the paper burning against my skin like fire. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man I had spent years defending and loving, but someone else entirely. Someone capable of betrayal so calculated it could sit beside flowers and smiles without flinching. Someone who could hum in the shower while his lies lay waiting in a drawer for me to find. That morning, our anniversary ceased to be a celebration. It became the marker of an ending. The day I stopped being his wife in my heart, even if the world still saw me as one. The note was more than proof of infidelity. It was the moment my entire life cracked open, spilling out truths I could never gather back again. I don't remember how long I sat there after slipping the note back into the drawer, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he would hear it from the hallway. When he stepped into the bedroom, fresh from the shower, his shirt half-buttoned and his hair still damp, he looked at me the way he always did on mornings like these, with that careless smile, warm enough to melt years of doubt, strong enough to make me forget the cracks that had already begun to show in our life together. But this time, I didn't smile back. I watched him adjust his tie, the one I had chosen absent-mindedly, the one I had placed on the bed minutes before my entire world collapsed. He hummed to himself, unaware of the storm gathering inside me. The note's words pulsed in my chest like a drumbeat. Last night was unforgettable. You belong to me. Each syllable was a blade. Each line was a betrayal written in someone else's hand but carved into my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the note in his face, demand the truth, force him to look me in the eyes and confess. But I didn't. My body betrayed me. Instead of rage, there was silence. A silence so sharp it cut through me, heavier than any scream could have been. He glanced at me in the mirror while tightening his tie. "You look beautiful," he said softly, as if those words could erase everything. My throat burned, my tongue heavy with the weight of questions I couldn't ask. I nodded, the corners of my lips twitching into a smile I didn't feel. That was our confrontation. Silent, invisible, a battle fought behind my eyes while his went blissfully blind. I measured every gesture, every look. I studied the way he touched his collar, the way he smoothed his shirt, wondering if those same hands had traced the body of the woman who wrote that note. I wondered if he could still smell her perfume when he leaned close to kiss me. The silence grew louder throughout the day. Over dinner, he raised his glass and toasted to us, his words honeyed and hollow. "To another year together," he said, his eyes twinkling with practiced charm. I clinked my glass against his, the sound sharp, brittle. The wine burned my throat as I swallowed it, forcing myself to hold his gaze. Did he know I knew? Could he see it in my eyes? Or was he so confident in his lies that he believed they were still safe? Every word he spoke felt like a performance now. When he asked about my day, I wondered if he was listening or replaying memories of her in his mind. When he reached across the table to take my hand, I felt the weight of someone else's touch lingering in his skin. I smiled, I nodded, I laughed in the right places. But inside, I was unraveling thread by thread. That night, when he fell asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The darkness pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating, while the note burned in the drawer across the room. My body was still, but my mind screamed. I turned toward him, studying the face of the man I had loved for years, searching for cracks, for signs, for answers. But his face was peaceful, almost innocent. and that innocence enraged me more than any confession ever could. The silent confrontation had begun. I carried the weight of his betrayal in my chest, unspoken, unacknowledged, yet undeniable. I wondered how long I could endure it, how long I could sit across from him, share a bed with him, wear his name, while knowing that his heart and body had been elsewhere. It was our anniversary, the day meant to honor promises made in front of God, family, and friends. Instead, it became the day I learned that promises could be broken quietly, without words, without screams, only with silence. And it was in that silence that I realized something cruel. Sometimes the most violent confrontations are the ones where no words are spoken at all. Silence became my weapon. If he could keep secrets, so could I. I decided that night, as he slept with his back turned to me, that I would not rush into confrontation. Not yet. I needed more than one note scribbled by a hand that was not mine. I needed to see the full shape of his betrayal, to hold it in my hands like proof carved into stone. The following days, I became an actress. Every smile I gave him was rehearsed. Every laugh was a disguise. I let him kiss my cheek. Let him leave the house with his briefcase. Let him believe I was still the wife who trusted him. But the moment the door closed behind him, I transformed. My heart, once desperate to believe in his loyalty, now burned with a colder determination. I started small. I went back to the drawer where I had found the note, searching for more. I sifted through receipts, old business cards, scraps of paper folded carelessly. At first, nothing. But then I began to notice patterns. Restaurants we never went to, hotels in the city where he claimed to be working late, receipts for dinners charged on dates when I remembered eating alone. The lies were threaded into the fabric of our life, hiding in plain sight. Each one was small enough to dismiss, but together they formed a tapestry of betrayal. At night, I waited until he was asleep, his breathing steady beside me, before I reached for his phone. My hand shook as I typed in the passcode I had seen him enter 100 times without thought. The screen unlocked, and the glow of it lit my face like fire in the dark. I scrolled through messages, my pulse pounding in my ears. Most were mundane, work emails, reminders, the kind of clutter that fills a life. But then, hidden under a name I didn't recognize, I found them. Words of intimacy, of longing. Short, sharp bursts of passion sent late at night, when I thought he was sitting at his desk, when I thought he was mine. I miss you. Can't stop thinking about last time. Soon, I promise. I dropped the phone onto the nightstand, my body trembling with fury. Every line confirmed what the note had screamed. I was not the only woman in his life. In the mornings, I followed him with my eyes as he dressed, memorizing his movements, his excuses. Late meeting tonight. Don't wait up. Words that once rolled past me now lodged in my chest like arrows. I began to keep a journal, writing down the dates, the times, the places he claimed to be. Each page filled with details, a map of lies waiting to be connected. The investigation became my shadow. I drove past places he said he had been, scanning parking lots, peering into crowded restaurants. Once, I saw his car parked outside a hotel, its windows reflecting the neon sign above. I didn't dare go inside. Not yet. But the sight alone was enough to hollow me out. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister. Not my closest friend. This was mine to carry. Mine to unravel. Speaking it aloud would make it real, and I wasn't ready for the world to know what I knew. So I smiled at family dinners, laughed with friends, played the role of the devoted wife, all while stitching together the truth behind closed doors. The silence of my investigation was deafening. Every discovery screamed at me, yet I said nothing. He still kissed my forehead before leaving for work. He still held my hand when we crossed the street. He still called me my love in front of others. And I let him, because I was waiting. The note had opened the wound. The investigation poured salt into it. And though the pain was unbearable, I needed it. I needed every drop of truth to steady myself for the storm I knew was coming. And in those quiet hours when the evidence piled higher and my heart grew heavier, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. Our anniversary hadn't been the beginning of another year together. It had been the first day of the end. Carrying a secret is like walking with stones in your pockets. At first, you think you can manage it, that no one notices the heaviness dragging at your steps. But as the days stretch into weeks, the weight grows unbearable. Your body bends under it, and every movement becomes a performance. That was me. I lived each day with the crushing weight of what I knew, and yet no one around me suspected a thing. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I still smiled when neighbors waved from across the street. I still cooked his favorite meals, served them on the same plates we'd used for years, listening as he complimented me with words that sounded hollow in my ears. I still attended dinners with friends, laughed at jokes, played the part of the wife who had it all under control. But inside, every gesture was poisoned, every laugh forced. I carried the secret like a second skin, invisible to others, but suffocating to me. The note was hidden back in the drawer, but I felt its presence every time I walked past the bedroom. It was like a living thing, whispering to me in the quiet of the house, reminding me that I wasn't enough, that he wasn't mine. And when I added the receipts, the late-night messages, the hotel sightings to that growing pile of knowledge, it became unbearable. I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake at night, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering how he could rest so easily when he had divided himself between two women. The worst part wasn't even his betrayal. It was the silence I was forced to keep. There were moments when I wanted to scream it into the world, to call my sister and spill every detail, to confide in a friend over coffee. But shame kept me quiet. I didn't want their pity, their judgment, their knowing looks. I didn't want to become a story whispered about at gatherings. So I carried it alone, locking the truth inside my chest where it pressed harder with each passing day. The weight began to change me. I moved differently, spoke differently. I studied him with new eyes, dissecting every word, every gesture, wondering what part of him belonged to me and what part belonged to her. I began to notice his patterns, the way he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, the sudden brightness in his eyes when a message arrived. I began to notice his absences not as inconveniences but as betrayals, and the house itself turned against me. Our home, once a place of comfort, became suffocating. The dining room table where we had shared meals now felt like a stage where he rehearsed lies. The bed where we had once whispered dreams became a battlefield of silence. Even the walls seemed to whisper at night, carrying echoes of words he had never spoken to me but had given to her instead. Carrying the secret began to change how I saw myself. I started to question everything. Was I blind? Was I naive? Was I so desperate to hold on to the idea of love that I ignored what was right in front of me? Shame clung to me like sweat, convincing me that his betrayal was also my failure. And yet, for all the heaviness, I held the secret close. Because I wasn't ready to lose everything. Because saying it out loud meant shattering the illusion completely. Because once I spoke it, there would be no turning back. So I kept smiling. I kept cooking. I kept lying to the world with the same conviction he used to lie to me. And all the while, the secret grew heavier, crushing me slowly, day by day. Until one morning, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I realized something terrifying. I no longer recognized the woman looking back. Her eyes were hollow, her smile brittle, her body bowed beneath the weight of what she carried. And I knew then that silence could only last so long before it destroyed me entirely. It came late one night, when the weight of silence had already begun to crush me. He walked into the bedroom after another late meeting. His tie loosened, the faint scent of perfume clinging to him that wasn't mine. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my journal open on my lap, though I hadn't written a word in hours. He looked at me with that practiced ease, that mask he had worn for years, and said something that nearly broke me. "Promise me you'll never doubt me." The words were soft, almost tender, spoken like a husband seeking reassurance. But to me, they were a blade twisted into the wound I already carried. How could he ask that of me now, when I had proof in a drawer, when I had his lies recorded in receipts and messages? when I had her words written in delicate ink reminding me that my marriage had already been split in two. I stared at him, my throat dry, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He sat beside me, his hand brushing mine as though the warmth of his skin could erase the chill he had planted in my soul. "After all we've been through," he whispered, "don't ever let anyone come between us. Promise me that." It was the impossible request. He wasn't just asking for trust. He was asking for silence. He was asking me to bury the truth I had uncovered, to swallow it whole and smile as though I hadn't seen the cracks in his mask. He was asking me to play the role of the devoted wife, even as he belonged to someone else. And for a moment, I almost gave him what he wanted. The years of loyalty, the memories of laughter, the countless sacrifices we had both made, they all rose up inside me, demanding I protect what little remained of the life we had built. I opened my mouth, ready to nod, ready to say the words that would chain me to him forever. But something in me resisted. A voice, faint but firm, whispered from the depths of my chest, "If you promise him this, you promise yourself a lifetime of silence." So I stayed quiet. I didn't nod. I didn't give him the lie he was asking for. I let the silence stretch between us until it grew uncomfortable, until he pulled his hand away and looked at me with a flicker of unease in his eyes. For the first time, maybe he sensed it, that I knew, that the game was no longer hidden, that the wife he thought he controlled was no longer blind. That night, I lay beside him, his arm draped over me like a chain, and I thought of how many impossible requests I had already given into during our marriage. The request to forgive without apology, the request to believe excuses I knew were lies, the request to put his needs before my own. Each one had chipped away at me, leaving me smaller, weaker, until there was almost nothing left. But this one, I could not grant, because to promise him my silence now was to erase myself completely. And as I stared into the darkness, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I realized something I had been afraid to admit until then. The only way to save myself was to break the promise he wanted most. I thought the note had been enough. I thought the late-night messages, the receipts, the perfume clinging to his clothes, those were the deepest cuts I would endure. But the truth has a way of peeling itself back in layers, each one more brutal than the last. And it was in the quiet of his office, a place I had avoided for weeks, that I uncovered the betrayal that made every wound before it feel shallow. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon. He had left for yet another urgent errand, and the house was filled with the steady patter of rain against the windows. Something inside me pushed me toward his desk, as though the storm outside had stirred a storm within. I sat in his chair, the leather cold against my skin, and began pulling open drawers one by one. Papers rustled beneath my hands. Insurance documents, tax forms, old letters from colleagues. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But then I found a folder tucked beneath a stack of blank envelopes, its edges worn, its corners bent as if it had been opened and closed too many times. Inside were printed emails, carefully folded and saved. Not just brief exchanges or notes of longing, but detailed messages stretching across pages. My stomach twisted as I read them, my eyes devouring words I couldn't unsee. They weren't only lovers. They were planning a life. In those emails, he wrote to her about leaving me, about selling the house, about starting fresh in another city where no one knew their names. He promised her things he had never promised me, not after years of sacrifice, not after anniversaries spent waiting for him to come home, not after all the times I had stood by him when the world turned cruel. He wrote to her about giving her the future I had begged for and never received. But the deepest lie was still waiting at the bottom of the folder. A draft of a will, unsigned but typed neatly on thick paper, naming her not just as his lover, but as his beneficiary. Her name where mine should have been, her child, unborn, unproven, granted rights to everything I had helped him build. I sat there trembling, the words swimming before my eyes, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just betrayal of the body anymore. It wasn't just stolen nights or whispered confessions. It was betrayal of my existence. He had been writing me out of his life while still sleeping in my bed, eating at my table, smiling at me across candlelit dinners on anniversaries I had fought to celebrate. The rain outside grew heavier, pounding against the windows as though the sky itself demanded I acknowledge the truth. I clutched the papers in my hands, my tears smearing the ink, my body shaking so violently the chair creaked beneath me. The deepest lie wasn't that he loved her more. It was that he no longer loved me at all, that somewhere along the way, he had chosen to erase me entirely, to pretend I had never been the woman who held his hand through sickness, who paid the bills when his business faltered, who gave up dreams so his could live. I wasn't just betrayed, I was being replaced. And sitting in that chair, surrounded by the evidence of my erasure, I realized that the man I thought I knew had died long before his body ever would. Just when I thought I had reached the bottom of the pit, when the lies had already piled so high around me that I could barely breathe, life twisted the knife in a way I hadn't anticipated. The papers in his office had shown me his intentions, his secret promises to her, his plans to erase me. I thought that was the final truth, the cruelest blow. But then came the phone call. It was late evening, the kind of night when shadows stretch across the walls and silence presses into every corner of the house. I had just finished folding laundry, mundane tasks now feeling absurd against the storm of betrayal raging inside me, when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment I hesitated before answering. "Is this Mrs. Harper?" the voice asked, cautious, feminine. "Yes," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. There was a pause, and then she said it. I think we're both victims of the same man." The blood drained from my face. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. The voice on the other end wasn't the woman who had written the note. It wasn't her. It was someone else entirely. She told me her name, stumbling through the introduction as though ashamed. She explained that she had been involved with him too. Not recently, but for years, overlapping with my marriage, overlapping with the other woman. She had ended it when she realized his promises never matched his actions. But she wanted me to know. "He was never faithful to either of us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You deserved the truth. We both did." The unexpected twist shattered everything once again. There hadn't just been one other woman. There had been more. The note I found, the emails I uncovered, the receipts, they weren't isolated betrayals. They were pieces of a larger pattern, a web of deceit spun so carefully that I had been entangled in it for decades without ever realizing. I sat in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, my hand covering my mouth to keep from sobbing too loudly. I wanted to hang up, to deny her words, to convince myself that one betrayal was enough to bear. But deep inside, I knew she was telling the truth. It explained the countless absences, the exhaustion he carried, the way his attention always seemed divided, his affection rationed like a resource he didn't have enough of. It wasn't just her. It wasn't just one mistake, one weakness, one lapse. It was his nature, his pattern, his life. And then, almost gently, she added, "He told me once that you'd never find out, that you were too loyal, too trusting, that he could live both lives forever." The words cut deeper than any knife. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had counted on my loyalty to protect him. He had built his lies on the foundation of my trust, confident I would never question, never look too closely. When the call ended, I sat in silence, my tears soaking the fabric of my dress. The house felt colder, emptier, no longer mine. The man I had celebrated anniversaries with, the man I had shared a bed with, the man I had defended for years. He was a stranger. Worse, he was a stranger who had turned me into a fool in my own home. The unexpected twist wasn't just discovering another woman. It was realizing that I had never truly been his only choice. I had been one of many, a role he played when it suited him. A wife in a marriage that existed only in the spaces where his lies allowed it to breathe. And for the first time, the anger outweighed the grief. The betrayal no longer felt like a wound. It felt like fuel. Because if he had built his life on lies, then I would no longer protect his legacy with silence. The call with the other woman replayed in my mind for days, her words echoing in the silence of my home. He told me you'd never find out, that you were too loyal, too trusting. The cruelty of that truth gnawed at me more than the infidelity itself. He had not only betrayed me, he had used my love as his shield, my loyalty as the stage on which he performed his double life. But something shifted in me after that night. For weeks I had been drowning, clinging to scraps of who I thought I was, crushed by the shame of carrying his secrets. But now the shame began to lift, not because the betrayal was less painful, but because I finally understood. It wasn't me. It had never been me. His choices weren't my failures. His lies weren't my blindness. They were his, and he would not bury me with them. The turning point came one afternoon when I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, but behind them was something new, a spark of defiance, a refusal to remain the silent victim in a story he had written without my consent. I thought of all the years I had given him, my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, building a life around a man who had built walls of deception around me. And I thought, no more. I began with the note, the one I had folded and hidden back in the drawer on our anniversary. I took it out, smoothed the creases, and placed it in a folder along with the receipts, the emails, the unsigned will. Piece by piece, I collected the evidence, not because I wanted to live in it, but because I was preparing. I was done being the woman who only reacted. I would act. The silence that had once suffocated me became my ally. He still believed I knew nothing, still kissed me on the cheek, still left for his late nights. And I let him. But behind my silence now was strategy. I was no longer carrying the weight of his lies. I was sharpening them into weapons. And as I prepared, I noticed changes in myself. My back straightened. My voice steadied. I looked him in the eye when he spoke. And though he didn't realize it, I wasn't listening to his lies anymore. I was memorizing the man who had underestimated me. The man who thought loyalty meant weakness. The real turning point, though, came the night I decided not to wait for him to leave. I watched him sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the screen. For years, that sight had been ordinary, unremarkable. But now I saw it differently. A man absorbed in a world that excluded me. A man who had counted on my silence as much as he had counted on her touch. And instead of shrinking, I felt taller, stronger. I realized that he could betray me 1,000 times. And yes, it would scar me, but it could never erase me. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of reclaiming the parts of myself he had tried to erase. That night, when I lay beside him, I whispered into the darkness, not to him, but to myself. This ends with me. The turning point was not an explosion, not a confrontation with screaming and accusations. It was quiet, internal, a fire lit in the ashes of what he had destroyed. It was the moment I chose myself over him, and once that choice was made, I knew there was no turning back. The decision to confront him came slowly, like a storm you see gathering at the horizon. You know it's coming. You feel the air grow heavy, but you wait until the sky splits before you admit you cannot escape it. For weeks, I had gathered evidence in silence. The note from the drawer, the receipts, the emails, even the phone call from the woman who confirmed he had lived more than one life. Each piece was a stone in the wall of truth I built around myself, and eventually there was no room left to hide from it. The night I chose to face him, the house felt unusually still. He was seated at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, a glass of whiskey at his side. I stood in the doorway watching him, my body rigid, my hand trembling against the frame. For years, this had been a scene of normalcy, a husband winding down after work. Now it was a stage where lies performed themselves without shame. I walked forward, placed the folder on the table, and sat across from him. He looked up, surprised, his brow furrowing at the sound of paper sliding across the wood. "What's this?" he asked, his voice cautious but still carrying that familiar air of control. "Everything," I said. My voice shook, but I didn't look away. He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first page. The note, folded carefully, the ink smudged from the tears I had shed on it weeks earlier. His lips parted slightly, then pressed into a hard line. He turned the page, then another, each one cutting deeper into his mask. Receipts, screenshots, emails. I watched his face change. Confusion, then recognition, then the slow spread of panic he tried to hide. For the first time in years, I saw him stripped of confidence. The man who always had an excuse ready, who could smile his way out of suspicion, now sat speechless as his secrets screamed at him from the pages. Finally, he spoke. "You've been spying on me?" His voice cracked, brittle, an accusation meant to shift the blame. I laughed bitterly, a sound I barely recognized as my own. Spying? No. Discovering. There's a difference. Silence filled the space between us, thick, suffocating. He stared at me, his jaw tight, his eyes searching mine for weakness. But there was none left. The woman who had once chosen silence was gone. "I found out on our anniversary," I continued, my voice steadier now. The note was the first, but it wasn't the last. And then she called me. Another woman. "Do you want me to read her words out loud to you? Do you want me to list their names?" His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in all our years together, he had no lie ready, no mask to put on. That moment was the encounter with the truth. Not just his truth, but mine. Because as I sat there watching him crumble under the weight of evidence, I realized that the confrontation was not about him anymore. It was about me, about finally releasing the chains of silence, about naming the betrayal, about standing in the storm instead of hiding from it. He looked at me then, truly looked, and for a flicker of a second, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me. He had lost me long ago, but fear of losing control, and that was the only power I had left to take back. I closed the folder, pulled it back toward me, and stood. "The truth is here," I said quietly, "and you can't bury it anymore." The encounter with the truth wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was sharp, quiet, final. A mirror held up to a man who had lived in shadows, and the reflection he saw was one he could never escape. And for me, it was the moment I finally stepped out of the role he had written for me and began writing my own. When the confrontation ended, when his silence confirmed everything his words could not, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, not closure, but release. For months I had carried the weight of secrets, the suffocating shame of betrayal, the heavy silence that threatened to drown me. And now, with the truth laid bare between us, I was lighter. Not healed, not whole, but unchained. The nights that followed were quiet. He stayed in the house, moving through rooms like a ghost, avoiding my gaze, leaving glasses half full on counters he never cleaned. We spoke little, our lives reduced to the exchange of practical necessities, bills, schedules, meals untouched. The marriage wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a shell, a hollow structure that cracked every time the wind of memory blew through. But I no longer felt trapped inside that shell. For the first time, I could breathe without his permission. I realized I had been living for years as half a person, bending myself around his absences, stitching myself together with loyalty he didn't deserve. His betrayal had destroyed the illusion, but in its destruction, I found myself. I thought often of the note, the one written in another woman's hand, the cruel declaration, "You belong to me." How ironic those words had become, because now I belonged to no one but myself. I remembered the impossible request he had made, "Promise me you'll never doubt me," and how my silence that night had been the first act of defiance. Looking back, that was the moment the tide began to turn, because doubt is not weakness. Doubt is the seed of truth, and once planted, it grows until the lies have no room left to live. The reflection that echoed loudest in me was simple yet unshakable. Betrayal does not define the betrayed. It defines the betrayer. His lies, his infidelities, his cowardice, they were not my scars to carry anymore. They were his legacy, his shame, his undoing. I learned that survival is not just about enduring the pain, but about choosing what to carry forward. I could carry bitterness, let it poison the years ahead, let it turn me into someone unrecognizable. Or I could carry strength, the knowledge that even when abandoned, I had stood, I had endured, and I had found a way to breathe again. On what would have been another anniversary, I lit a single candle at the dinner table. Not for him, not for us, but for me. For the woman who had discovered a note in a drawer and, instead of breaking completely, had chosen to confront the truth. For the woman who had walked through silence, humiliation, anger, and grief, and come out not unscarred but unbroken. I whispered into the flame, "I am mine." And as the candle flickered, I felt peace settle inside me. Not because the story had a happy ending, but because I had found the courage to end it myself.